Good morning, everyone. This is Natalie Gilly from the Bicycle Alliance of Minnesota on Wednesday, December 15th. Welcome to the Minnesota Bike Walk Leadership Network webinar. I'm going to share my screen here and we'll get started. So today's topic is biking and walking brings joy for all ages. We are spotlighting the community of Rochester today. So I'll introduce our speakers in just a few moments. So today's introductions, as we usually do for this webinar, we'll have you introduce in the chat box with your name and your location. And today's icebreaker question: when you're not fat biking in the snow, what's your favorite sled? And we have a couple prompts here: toboggan, saucer, tube, or maybe there's another way that you'd like to sled down the hill. So feel free to put that in the chat box and we'll welcome everyone to the webinar. Today's meeting is the Minnesota Bike Walk Leadership Network, and our purpose is to connect local bike walk leaders to share stories and ideas about how they're lifting up the walking and biking culture in their communities. We have a land acknowledgement statement. We want to acknowledge that we occupy the ancestral land of the several indigenous groups, including the Dakota, Ojibwe, Ho-Chunk, Cheyenne, Oto, Iowa, Meskwaki people. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. We affirm the Bicycle Alliance of Minnesota's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities. Despite centuries of colonial violence, this is still and always will be Indigenous land. Indigenous peoples are still here, demonstrating innumerable talents and gifts in the midst of continued oppression. They must be celebrated and uplifted. You'll see there on the screen, and maybe Ted, if you could put in the chat box, there's a link to find out to what native land that you're located on, if you'd like to use that link, and click on that to find out that information. This is our final webinar of 2021, so we'll be wrapping up with a spotlight on Rochester, and we will be kicking off 2022 on Wednesday, January 19th. Again, third Wednesday of the month, 11:30 to 12:30 on Zoom. And our speaker panel in January will be Dorian Greeley from Bike MN and Lalitha Surapanini from Health Professionals for a Healthy Climate. So we'll be kicking off the year discussing that topic, and we invite you to join in. If you're not already a member of the Minnesota Bike Walk Leadership Network, feel free to email me, natalie@bikemn.org, and we'll get you added to the listserv so that you can receive communications and get connected with the links for the replays of these webinars as well. You may also be part of a Safe Routes to School network. Here are their first quarter webinars that they'll be hosting January 6th, February 3rd, and March 3rd. And you'll see on the screen here the topics that they'll be covering. There's some survey results that they'll be reporting out on in January, demonstration projects and engineering projects also in January, and then moving to federal infrastructure bill and some updates about that in February. So to be determined as far as their topic in March. So feel free to reach out to Eric if you are interested in joining the Safe Routes to School network, if you're not already on there, erict@movemn.org. Today, I'm excited to announce our topic and our speakers and introduce them to the webinar. We're talking about biking and walking brings joy for all ages and spotlighting the community of Rochester. And our first speaker I'd like to introduce is Barbara Beck with Bike Rochester. She is a commuter cyclist and on and off for years before retirement, now a recreational cyclist. She served on the Pedestrian Bicycle Advisory Committee to the City of Rochester since 2017. She became a league cycling instructor in 2018, joined the Bike Rochester board in its first year in 2014, and is currently on the board as the education chair for Bike Rochester, involved in bike rodeos, bike commuting classes, and bike-friendly driving presentations. Welcome to the webinar, Barb. And Barb, you are on mute.
I see that.
There you go. Welcome to the webinar.
Thanks, Natalie. I'm happy to be here to share with you some recent developments in Rochester for both bike friendly stuff and walk friendly. I'm going to start with the walk friendly, but let me just say the city of Rochester and the Destination Medical Center group are both involved in wanting to reduce the number of single occupancy vehicles coming into the downtown. And so that's a major driver of the changes, as well as wanting to improve the aesthetics downtown. If you don't know about the Destination Medical Center initiative, a very, very brief version of that is that Mayo continues to attract additional what we call medical visitors to the city, patients, and they often are here for several days at a time, and they wanted to make the downtown more inviting for them. When you get more patients, you need more staff. We didn't want to fill up the downtown with parking ramps, so that they really want to increase travel into the downtown area where the Mayo campus is, by increasing those who bike, those who walk, and those who are taking transit. So I'll start with the walk and basically roll friendly projects that are mainly in the downtown core. And then I'll move to some of the new bike infrastructure that has been built here in the last 3 years. The city does have a complete streets policy, which means that every street project, even if it's just a repaving project, needs to consider all potential users, but not every project will include dedicated infrastructure. I do get surprised from time to time when they resurface a road that I didn't know that they were doing. And all of a sudden there's a painted bike lane on it. So it happens. All right, next slide, Natalie, please. So I want to start with our Peace Plaza. I can't remember how long the Peace Plaza has been in existence. It's probably a couple of decades. And if you look at the picture on the right, it sort of began with the installation of this sculpture that was created by a local sculptor, Charles Gagnon. And it's actually gone through different installations. It is a fountain. It's not set up yet because it just got placed back on the Peace Plaza within the last month or so, because they've been redoing this. So they wanted to change the Peace Plaza to make it more inviting and actually kind of less hot in the summertime, because it's open to the west, and it really gets a lot of sun late in the day in the summer. On the left, you see the conceptual design of this, and I was shocked when I took the picture on the right, and then when I was preparing this presentation, I realized that I got the exact same angle on the plaza that they had created. And I had no idea it would be that good. The Peace Plaza actually occupies 2 blocks that were formerly First Street Southwest. No, go back. Can you go back, Natalie? There we go. And so the near part is between Broadway and First Avenue. And then, as we'll see in the next picture, which I don't want to go to yet, the other half is across a road that is still active but has been changed recently. The other thing, so you might not be able to see in the photo on the right that they have planted some trees. There's obviously no leaves left on them, but we really expect that that will help cool the Peace Plaza. The other thing is that there's actually a depression on the far side of that sculpture fountain that will hold about an inch, maybe a half inch to an inch worth of water, so that they will be able to create a temporary reflecting pool there from time to time. Depending on the event that's happening, they may or may not want that. So that's kind of interesting. Also, there's a snow melt system underneath this to keep it hopefully snow free. It was mostly snow free when I walked through there on Monday. I'm not sure. There were some piles of snow. I'm not sure what was happening there. It's, you know, it's not all complete yet. Let's go to the next picture then. The next picture on the left shows the First Avenue going through the Peace Plaza to the sort of the upper part is on the west side, and that's still got that's the big Kaler Hotel there. And then the part that I just was talking about is on the right side. They've got those posts in there that are just sort of, they're very beautiful, but temporary posts so that you can take them out so they can move equipment in and out of the Peace Plaza for events. There used to be a traffic light here too, and I think they've taken it out. And I think the idea is that pedestrians it's designed for pedestrians to have the right of way at all times. The road surface has been created by these pavers that have words on them, and I have yet to figure out any kind of a message in there. I don't know if they're sentences. It's fairly new that we have access to it, but I think the rough surface is intended to calm the traffic, to keep the cars from going too fast. On the right, these are benches that are basically south, in the next block south of the Peace Plaza along First Avenue. And I was intrigued by their design. And I think it's because we have an event in the summertime called Thursdays on First. And so that there are a lot of vendors come out, you know, food and drink and craft vendors and so on. And so they're large gatherings and very popular. And so people get beverages and food, and then they don't really have a lot of places to put the stuff down. And it looks to me like the shelf on each one of those benches, and there are different heights, are for people to just kind of walk up and use that as their table. I think that's quite ingenious myself. It looks to me like the lower one is meant for folks in wheelchairs, which I think is a nice touch. So there's several of these benches along the way. All right, yeah, let's go on to the next slide. So the other big project that is just in the design phase is called Discovery Walk. And this goes from 2nd Street, it's on 2nd Avenue, so one block over, but it goes from 2nd Street south to Soldiers Field, which is about 5 blocks. North of 2nd Street is a plaza that it's Annenberg Plaza between the Mayo building and the Plummer and Siebens buildings. And so that's been a plaza for some time, so that the plaza is actually, the whole area is going to be approximately 6 or 7 blocks. So the picture on the left is what this looks like now. This is taken from DMC documents. I didn't take this picture, but it's kind of ugly. And the proposed design is on the right. The idea is that they're going to actually narrow the street, so there's just 1 lane each way. There will be some bump ins for food trucks, I think. I listened to a presentation about this, and I think that's one of the takeaways. As you can see with the text across the top, they're going to have a lot of seating, various benches of different kinds, going to do a massive amount of landscaping. It will increase the amount of public space, because they're basically putting all the stuff on the west side of 2nd Avenue, because that's where they have space available. So I think Mayo is giving up some space in order to help create this, because that's the I think that's the Discovery building on the left, but it's the Hilton building is also on that side. Let's see, trees. Oh, and then there's going to be, as you can see in the design picture, that they plan on actually providing some shelter from the weather for this too. So that should be interesting. So I don't know. I know that the next step in so this is schematic design phase. They're at the end of that, and the next is the actual design development, from what I understand. All right, now we're going to switch to bike infrastructure. Cycle tracks. So I'm starting with the newest, most exciting bike infrastructure that we got. So we opened this on our City of Rochester, opened it for celebration on Saturday, November 20th. And Marty organized a ride for this. There was kind of the mayor sort of did a little speech to open it. So what's happening here? So North Broadway, or Broadway itself, is the main north-south street through the center of Rochester. And it's never been easy or desirable or safe to cycle on the street there. So the city had enough right of way that they realized that they could create save all the same travel lanes on the roadway, but use the right of way they had on either side to create a cycle track, one-way cycle track on each side. And then in most places, there's a spacer between the cycle track and the sidewalk. What you see on the left is one of the new bus shelters, because there's going to be bus rapid transit along this corridor. And I'm hoping that some of these posts, which don't have any signage on them yet, will be, particularly the posts that are sitting between the cycle track and the sidewalk, is going to indicate that the one on the left is, or the one closest to the roadway, is the cycle track, and the one that's furthest from the roadway is the sidewalk, because cyclists seem to know which one they should be on, but these pedestrians are a little confused still since there's no signage. But we're really excited. This goes all the way up from Civic Center Drive, which is basically between 4th Street and 5th Street, or is the equivalent of 4th Street. I don't know. Been to Rochester, I fully understand why you get confused about some of the street names, because they change in strange places. Because mostly Civic Center Drive is it's sort of diagonal, and it mostly goes sort of east-west, but then when it gets past Broadway, it actually turns south. So it's kind of odd. But this goes all the way up to just before you get to the Silver Lake Dam, which is at just north of 13th Street. So it's like good 8 blocks. And this basically then connects with the trails, not really so much trails, across the Silver Lake Bridge. We have an issue with Silver Lake Bridge that the pedestrian walkway is not very wide on there, so it's a little tricky to cross it. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This bike infrastructure was completed in 2019, I believe. And I'm only showing you a short bit. So just the background is that 3rd Avenue is a one-way street. 3rd Avenue West is a one-way street that goes basically from 6th Street South to 6th Street North. So you got 12 blocks, and that's where they've put the bike lanes. 4th Avenue is one-way south. So they also have bike lanes, a one-way bike lane on 4th Avenue. I wanted to show you how complicated this can be here, because 3rd Avenue also runs past the drop-off points for the Mayo Building and the Gonda Building. So the left picture is right at the intersection with 2nd Street, and the building that you see in the upper right of that left picture is the corner of the Mayo Building. As you cross 2nd Street there, then you get to the middle picture where you can see that there's a drop-off indent where you can park there for a brief period of time, et cetera, et cetera. And then they built the bike lane with basically buffers on both sides, but because cars need to be able to cross that, it's marked with dashed lines rather than solid lines. We're trying to teach people that, you don't cross solid white lines, but you can cross dashed white lines. I have to say, one time, a couple months ago, I was riding up here because I rode on this street even before it was designated a bike lane, and there was a car parked right in the bike lane instead of being 7 feet over in the proper place to park. I have no idea what that person was thinking. I just boggles the mind. But there's still a lot of education we have to do about how to drive in these areas. And then the next picture is a little further ahead, where it shows the bike lane, and then you're going past the Gonda building, and just in front of the red car on the right is where there's the exit from the drop off of the Gonda building, and that's probably the most dangerous part of this setup, is that because cars are coming out of there. My experience has been that almost all of them come out very slowly, although I move very slowly and carefully past that. But I find that it works for me. I haven't had any trouble with this. And I used to ride this route, as I said before, even before it was dedicated as a bike lane. 4th Avenue is similar. There are some issues. There aren't quite as many issues as there are on 3rd Avenue. But the idea of having these bike lanes in this area is that this is actually 3rd and 4th are sort of in the middle of the Mayo campus. So if you want Mayo employees to ride their bike to work, you want to get them as close to where they want to be as possible. Also, just on the far side of the Gonda building actually is Center Street, which goes east-west, and that also has bike lanes on it. And then next slide is infrastructure that we finished on 4th Street Southwest in 2018. The picture on the left shows a somewhat unusual design for a bike lane setup. This 4th Street Southwest used to be 2 lanes each way, and they took away 1 lane. It's because they could, because based on the traffic volume. Just west of these bike lanes, starting at 6th Avenue West, it's all residential, so it's not, that wasn't 2 lanes each way. So they just narrowed the street that way, but there had always been parking on both sides, so that they included the parking. So you can see next to the median is the travel lane, and then there are parking spaces, and then there's a buffer zone, and we want some more permanent protection in there, but it hasn't happened yet. But we try to signal that the vehicles need to stay out of that buffer. But honestly, they take away the bollards in the winter, and cars sort of park partially into the buffer zone a lot. So that's not great, but we do still have the bike lane along the curb. I didn't go on 4th Street since the snowstorm to see how well that was cleared this time. Let's see. But when you get down to the intersection at 1st Avenue, which is the picture on the right, we have the one and only real bike box in Rochester. It looks a little like the space is kind of narrow, but that's just because of the angle of the picture. If I had a drone to take pictures with, I would show you that it's probably 10 feet deep. I think it's really quite big. I'm not sure. I don't use this part of the infrastructure very much, so I'm not sure how well the vehicles navigate it. But if you're not familiar with the bike box, it comes into play when the light is red, and that gives the opportunity for cyclists coming up on the right to move over and sit in front of the vehicles that are in the travel lanes there. It is signed as there's no turn right on red. I honestly I don't go through this intersection very often, so I don't know how well that's working. But it's almost acting like a demonstration project, I think. We did produce a video to explain it to the community, but I don't think that was very widely viewed. So I'm not sure, as I said, how well that's working out. Maybe Marty can talk about that if he goes through there. On the next slide is my contact information, my email. We have a generic Bike Rochester Gmail account if you want to talk to folks in general on Bike Rochester. And then we also have a website. There we go.
Thank you, Barb. This is great information. You know, we're featuring Rochester, and Barb discussed both pedestrian and biking infrastructure that's new and in place there, and some visions for the future here. We did have a couple of comments in the chat box, so I want to make sure that I pause to recognize those. It sounds like Luke from Jackson, Minnesota is interested in connecting with you, Barb, about discussing the amenities for pedestrians, and has dropped his email into the chat box if you'd like to pick that up and correspond.
Okay.
Ted mentioned that this looks very similar to 66th Street in Richfield, Minnesota. And Marty added that they'll be painting cycle logos and arrows in the spring, and that was the picture with the bike, with the bus stop and the pedestrian and the cycle track. I believe that was the slide that was up on the screen when you made that comment. So more paint coming soon. And then there was a comment from Karen Cohen. She mentions that, Barb, I checked with Public Works recently, and they do intend to mark and paint the new bike tracks next spring. They ran out of time this fall to get that done. So just basically reiterating, I think, what you were mentioning. So great to hear that. So some support for the buffer zones, people like that. And education is definitely needed. So, you know, we started the presentation today with Barb's presentation on infrastructure. Marty is going to talk in a few minutes about some encouragement activities, and education is definitely key to make sure that people understand where they need to ride, and you know, as well as the drivers understand how to navigate with the cyclists using the bike box and these other infrastructure pieces. So. All right, so I'll pause for a moment here and see if anyone would like to ask Barb a question about what she's presented, or engage in some dialogue about infrastructure in Rochester. And everyone entered the webinar on mute. So if you'd like to speak, then just unmute your line and ask your question.
Hey, I'll start, Barb. You know, so can you just tell folks who maybe don't know, like, a little bit about what it means that Bike Rochester is a chapter?
You mean a chapter of Bike Men?
Yes.
Yeah, I actually remember how that happened. We got Kelly Corbin, who started Bike Rochester, had gotten in touch with Dorian from early on, I think, when she was starting the group. And then we, at some point, and I don't know who proposed it, but maybe it was Bike Men that said, hey, you know, because we actually had no money at all to begin with, none, zero. And so they sort of proposed that we join them, and that when they would get membership money from individuals who were in the Rochester area, then they would share that with us. And so that was basically how it got started, I think. And there were some other, you know, so there are some bylaws, which I don't remember what they say anymore, but but that was kind of how it went. And we have benefited greatly from the association with Bike Men. I mean, it's been fabulous. So
thank you.
Can I just say, I actually shepherded our Bike Friendly community application from Rochester, or the renewal the last time, and we got a huge amount of help from Bike Men to make sure that we were filling stuff out in the right way. So I really appreciated that.
Thanks, Barb, and thanks for your question, Ted. Just to kind of bring this full circle around how these partnerships develop across the state of Minnesota. We have a lot of people from across the state here today that have joined us, and appreciate your participation today to engage with this topic and to learn. And even the presentations themselves are education about infrastructure. So being part of this webinar today will help you learn a little bit about how some of these pieces of infrastructure do work and how this might work in your community as well. So I think what we'll do here is pivot to the other speaker, Marty, and let him comment on anything in addition to what's been shared here. And then we'll hold for some questions at the end as well, if people have additional questions. So I will start sharing my screen again here, and then we'll get Marty's presentation up on the screen, and I'll introduce you here to the webinar. So Marty Cormack is a Chicago, Illinois native who recently retired after 41 years as an IT professional in Rochester, Minnesota. He lives with his wife, Ginny, who has 2 children and 1 grandchild. Marty spends much of his time riding his bicycles, enjoying road, trail, and gravel riding along with bike packing. Marty also plays ice hockey with an over 50 group in Rochester and is a Minnesota Wild season ticket member. Marty is a lay associate of the Rochester Franciscan Sisters. Marty also volunteers his time with the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, which serves our neighbors in need, and is a board member of We Bike Rochester. Welcome to the webinar, Marty.
Thanks a lot, Natalie. I was going to make one comment on the end of Barb's presentation. It had to do with the bike box. Barb hasn't used it. I've tried to use it twice. There's been 2 times I wanted to make the left turn there, and both times I could have used it. There was a vehicle all the way through the bike box and into the crosswalk. So we definitely need to do a little bit more education there. So anyway, but I'm going to give a presentation on mostly what we tried to do as social riders during the worst part of the pandemic, and what we've done since with the pandemic to try and keep people engaged and in community together when we couldn't bike as groups anymore. So we go to the first slide. And basically there was 2 phases. There was the pandemic lockdown phase. That's where there were no vaccines available. And so at that point, group riding was pretty much discouraged. Also early in the pandemic, we didn't know much about the spread of the virus. And so due to the a large amount of caution, we definitely said no group riding. It would be families together only, but no group riding. And so we had to figure out strategies for keeping people engaged and do solo cycling. And especially during the winter, like last winter before the vaccines were available, it was how do you get people out of their house and to ride when there was no social activities and no group riding. And then after the vaccines became available, and it was determined that it was going to be safe enough to do limited group riding with vaccinated bicyclists, then we had to try and re-engage our social group rides. But again, because of a modicum of caution, we needed to continue to do that in a safe manner. And so we adapted some things in the process to make that happen. We can go to the next slide. So that our lockdown solution is we started a game among our social riders, and it's bike tag. And I'm not the idea person. Both of these ideas that I'm going to present, other folks in our group got the ideas, but as the chair for the social rides, I was the one who was responsible for making sure they were implemented and kept them going. So the bike tag was something that was my understanding was an idea borrowed from a Twin Cities bicycle group or club. And again, it was encouraging solo riding around the entire city of Rochester. And our engagement and community building was done through social media. we can go to the next slide. And you need to memorize this slide if you can all see it. No, I'm just joking. If you're interested, we did have to have rules for our bike tag game, and it had to make them pretty explicit. And if you want me to, I can email you the rules that we were using. But basically, we set the rules so to make the game flow as best possible. So the basic rules of the game is the first person goes out and they find a location in Rochester, be it a landmark or an art piece. We've got a lot of sculptures and murals of Rochester along bike paths. So you could use some of those. And what you do is you take a picture of your bicycle as close to one of these landmarks as possible. And the best strategy is to focus in real close so you don't give it away with the background information, but you can do that if you like. And then once you've done that, you post your picture and say, this is a new tag, go find it. And so the next step is folks would go, first of all, they have to kind of figure out where might this be. And some of us use tools like Google Street View to try and hone in on them, but other folks actually got on their bikes and searched the city for the tags. And if you're the first person to get the tag, you then go and put your bicycle up against the, whatever that landmark or art piece might have been. And usually you would back up. The original tag, you would be close in, but on the tag that you are claiming the tag, you would back up so that maybe some of the background information would appear in the photo. And then you'd say, this is where it is. And you post that to social media. And then the next step is you're the one who made the tag. So you now have an hour to go produce a new tag. And so what most people did was that were playing is they would actually bag tag. So they would ride around town and they'd see interesting places and they'd take a picture of their bike there and they'd hold that in so that the next time that they actually caught the tag, they would have one ready to go. And and after 24 hours, if someone hadn't found the tag, you were supposed to give a clue. And typically what we would do is the first clue would be a little bit obscure or would use humor or something. But if you got to the 48-hour mark, then you were given some really explicit clues so that we didn't want this to drag on. You wanted people motivated to get out there and do the tag. And on some days, the tags would transfer 3 or 4 times in a day. And the more difficult tags would last 3 or 4 or 5 days. And the rules were if it got to 7 days and no one found the tag, then you had to start all over with a new tag. But I don't believe until the very end in April that we ever got to the 7-day mark. And so, and then obviously you want to do this in a safe manner. But a big advantage of it was you got to actually ride all over from one end of town to the other end of town on all the bike trails and all the bike lanes and even into some of the neighborhoods to find these tags. And in my case, it was pretty depressing during the lockdown last winter. And there's some days I didn't feel like riding. And then I see a tag and I go, I know where that is. And I get dressed up and climb on my bike and go off and find the tag. And so if we go to the next, the next screen, here's an example of one of the tags I posted. And if I took a wide angle picture of this tag, it would be really obvious where it is. But because I zoomed in really close, it's not real obvious where this tag is. It turns out that this little monument is about geology of the Silver Lake area. And if I step back 20 feet, it would be very obvious that this bike tag is on Silver Lake in Rochester. And so I made it as obscure as I could so people would have to do at least a little bit of work, though it's adjacent on one of the bike trails that goes around Silver Lake. So folks who would ride around Silver Lake every day probably found it really quickly. And we can go to the next slide. And this is one where I actually found the tag. The original picture just showed a bike leaning up against part of this windmill, which is in Southeast Rochester, and by a catering place. That windmill's been there for decades. It used to be a dairy back there. And I forget the name of the dairy, but it had something, I think it was Dutch something dairy back in the day, back when milkmen actually would deliver milk to your house every day. But the windmill is still there, but the dairy is long gone. But so this is an example of where I backed up the photo away from the original photo so people would actually get a better idea where it might have been. And so we ran that game all the way until April. And actually on April 1st, we had Fool's Tag, where people would actually Photoshop their bicycle on top of some place, like someone had the Great Wall of China, and I had mine on top of the Plumber Building, and my wife had one where she had a bike rack on the back of the moon lander rover. So we just, it was April 1st, so we had a little fun with it. But that was the end of the game, because by April 1st, people were becoming fully vaccinated. And so we moved on to the next phase. So you can go to the next slide. And so how do you get re-engaged now that we could do group rides? And at that point, we were still not real sure whether it was still safe to gather indoors, and how would you engage during the acceptable weather conditioning if outdoor socializing was the safest option. So then one of our members came up with another idea, and we can go to the next slide. And that's what we called the PPP, or Picnic, Pedal, and Pub. And the basic concept was we would do this every Tuesday evening. We used to do social rides on Tuesdays. And so we started to re-engage with Tuesday evening social rides. And they would start at 5:30. And what we plan to do is we would find one of the parks with a sufficient number of picnic tables, and we would decide that would be where we would picnic. And we would pick a different park every week so that we would get folks from different parts of the city familiar with all the different parks that have picnic options. And we strongly encourage folks, because coming out of the pandemic, a lot of our restaurants had suffered pretty badly during the pandemic. So we strongly encourage people to go and do takeout, curbside takeout from one of the local restaurants that were hurt during the pandemic to try and boost their business. And then you would bring that to the park, and at 5:30, we would sit down at the picnic tables and eat our dinner and shoot the breeze and do whatever. And then promptly at 6 o'clock, we would all assemble and climb on our bikes and do a 1 hour easy pace social ride throughout the Rochester, mostly on the bike trails in Rochester. We have, as you probably know, we have an extensive bicycle trail network because of the flood control that was done in the 80s. So you could ride from one end of town and all around. There are hundreds of miles of bicycle trails. So we would design the route that would go from one of the parks that we picnicked at, and then end up at one of the watering holes at the end. And in the most case, it was a restaurant or tavern or brewery that had, again, we stuck with the locally owned places, and we would try to get one that had sufficient patio seating so that we could congregate outside. Again, so we picnicked outside, we congregated outside. So masking and distancing wasn't a big issue because we were outdoors. We can go to the next slide. We advertised our PPP every week by email and use social media. And here is the logo that one of our board members created. And so it was, again, BYO picnic, a group ride, and then a social hour afterwards. And so this worked out really well. We had folks of all ages. We got to meet some new folks. We had some new professionals who recently moved to Rochester. They found out about us and they came to some of our rides. We sometimes had family members bring children I brought my one of my grandchildren on one of the rides when they were visiting, and we had quite a number of retirees as well, and folks into their 70s and 80s participate in it. So because of the camaraderie and the easy picnic option, and then the social hour after, we did engage folks of all ages, and so that worked out really, really well. And if you go to the next slide, this is me leading one of the rides, and right behind me is my wife Ginny on her e-bike. So we had folks with all sorts of different bikes. Our sweep was usually a couple that ride a tandem recumbent tricycle. And so they always ran our sweeps at the end. So we had all sorts of different bikes. We had road bikes, we had commuter bikes, we had e-bikes, we had tandems, we had tricycles, and so it worked out really well. And then there was the occasional cargo bike with kids, and there was the occasional bike with a burly on the back with kids. So it worked out really, really well. We usually had between 16 and 24 riders on all these. So we were very pleased with the re-engagement and the number of folks that would come out. Our registration list had nearly over 50, or I think it was more like 60 or 70 people signed up to ride occasionally on this. And so even though it was 16 and 24 riders, on most nights we had, it wasn't the same riders every week. There was a core group that showed up every week, but there were new riders every week. And so we got to meet some new folks and really enjoyed it. And if you go to my second to last slide, here's us at a picnic shelter, just about ready to climb on our bikes and ready to go. And as you can see, there are different styles of bikes, and a whole group of different folks, including Barbara's there next to me. So we were all ready to go. And that's the end of my presentation. And so if you have any questions, here's my my personal email address, and I feel free to contact me, and I can share any of the ideas. And I will take any questions at this point.
Thanks, Marty. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing in just a moment here with my screen so that we can see each other a little better. If you'd like Marty's email address, take it down here, martycormack@gmail.com. So we'll pause for a moment here and see if there's any questions in the chat box. There's a few comments from a few people here. I see that Matthew Lynch from Rochester has commented a couple of times, but smiles all around, it sounds like, on the social ride. So good to hear about that. Dan asked a question, more housekeeping around the webinar, about whether or not there's a way to receive the slide presentation. This webinar is being recorded today, and all the slides on the screens that you see are recorded along with the webinar. So thank you to everyone who are present today on the webinar, and also if anyone would like to watch it after the webinar, you'll be able to see the slides as they were presented, along with the video with the presenter speaking. So if anyone would like to ask any questions to Marty or to Barb, feel free to unmute and you can ask them at this time. There was a question in the chat box here about some concerns around, the Omicron variant and anything that would be considerations going forward with group rides. How do you decide? You know, I do appreciate Marty sharing the story today about the way that they dealt with the pandemic along the way and how it evolved and what the decision points they made. Did you want to speak to any of that, Marty, or things that you might be considering going forward into 2022?
Well, the first thing on the group rides, we had a waiver that you had to sign to be invited to our group rides. And one of the questions on the waiver was, are you vaccinated? Because we felt that it was only going to be safe for all our riders if the participants were vaccinated. And so if you put together vaccination and the outdoors without being really crowded. Those are the public health folks will tell you that outdoors in not a crowded situation and vaccination is pretty safe. It remains to be seen on what's going to happen with Omicron. And so if anything, we're not doing any social rides in a real organized fashion right now. But I'm assuming that, again, if you're riding outdoors and vaccinated, that, and especially boosted, the recommendation now is to make sure you get your boosters. If you're in that situation, a social ride outdoors should not be an issue, but we are still not yet congregating indoors. We're going to have a holiday lights ride. It was supposed to be tonight, but because of the weather forecast, we postponed it to Friday. And normally, in normal years, when we would have had our Christmas lights ride, we would end up at a restaurant. But on Friday night, we're going to just do coffee and eggnog and hot cider out of the back of someone's car and just congregate in a parking lot to do that. So we're still remaining outdoors and not doing indoor dining or indoor drinking. And so that's the way that we can keep people safe. And if you want to understand that, is we have some folks that have spouses that are very vulnerable. And also we have quite a number of Mayo Clinic folks who rigorously adhere to the public health guidelines. So we're pretty strict on the way we approach things.
Thanks, Marty. Thanks for speaking to those considerations and what you guys are doing in Rochester to address that. Does anyone else have a question for Marty or for Barb about Rochester infrastructure or Rochester encouragement activities?
I see Ted noted my Strava. Yeah, I've already done an 18-mile bike ride, but it was on my e-bike, so it's wasn't as hard as what I did yesterday on my fat tire. But yes, I'm a full-time recreational bicyclist, and last year I did 11,000 miles, and this year I'm up to 9,400 miles. So I try to get out on a bike every day.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Marty. Well, here's Marty's email again. Once again, martycormack@gmail.com if you have any additional questions. So thank you so much for your presentation. The next person I'd like to introduce to the webinar today is Dorian Greeley, our Executive Director here at the Bicycle Alliance of Minnesota. And he has a couple of things he'd like to share with you today. Welcome, Dorian.
Hi, thanks, Natalie. Hello, everyone. I think many of you are familiar with the Bikeable community workshops that we've been doing for the last several years. And I would encourage you to apply. Those who have already had a workshop, some who have already had a workshop are considering applying again because it's been several years and you've done lots of great things and we need to go to the next level. So those applications are open. We have a very good and engaged Green Corps member this year named Tim. And I actually will look forward to participating in some of those Bikeable community workshops in person. So if there aren't any questions, I guess we should move on. You can, Tim's email was there, so if you have any questions, you can ask Tim. And I just really love the fact that pretty soon we're going to have to go to a different format for this map, or else just make it bigger. Stillwater was added last week as the 33rd bicycle-friendly community in Minnesota. And when Bike and Men started working on this in 2009 and adopted the League of American Bicyclists program as a great benchmarking tool and an excellent way to measure what's really going on with bicycling, in addition to just building infrastructure. Many of you know that I'm very fond of saying, you can't just build it and hope that people come. you have to do the education, the encouragement, engagement, and evaluate your investments and make sure that those are all done under the umbrella, under the equity umbrella, making sure everyone in your community. So I've actually been working with Stillwater for close to a decade on this. So I want to call them out for their persistence and working on this. They still have a ways to go on education before they could get a silver ranking, but their infrastructure is just kind of stunning. And the number of people in downtown Stillwater on a bicycle every day of the week is kind of mind-boggling. And they have the wonderful recognition of having the only non-motorized state highway in the state, in Minnesota, the Stillwater Bridge. But I also want to call out Jackson, Minnesota, that has been doing some excellent work. It's probably, as many of you in bigger communities know, it's easier to engage and get people fired up when your community is a smaller one. And Jackson has done an excellent job of that. And my other thing I love to say about Jackson is never underestimate the power of some community advocates that are determined to do good for their community. And Jackson is a great, I mean, you're all great examples of that. And Jackson is another great example of that. St. Cloud was renewed at the bronze level. I'm excited about that. They're excited about that. And it's nice to know there's a cluster there of Sartell and St. Cloud. And there's others working on bike-friendly ranking in that area of Stearns County and Benton County in Minnesota. And lastly, I was quite disappointed that St. Paul did not receive a gold ranking. They were renewed at the silver level. Their investment of over $60 million of their own money in infrastructure is quite stunning. If you haven't been bicycling in St. Paul, their protected bikeway system is kind of, well, it's state of the art, and it's kind of mind-boggling. And the league's reason was, you know, it's all brand new, and people, it hasn't really helped shift mode share yet. So hopefully it'll shift mode share in a couple of years, and they won't have to wait 4 years to reapply to be successful at the gold level. So congratulations to those 4 communities and to all of you who are from bike-friendly communities and have worked on that goal. Our partners at the Department of Health and MnDOT and many others are quite passionate about this. And I didn't join you at the beginning of the meeting because I was on the MnDOT Sustainable Transportation Advisory Council call, where we were making recommendations about vehicle miles traveled reduction, and or at least the committee I was on was making those recommendations. And biking, walking, and transit obviously play a critical role there. And you've all heard me say, be ready with shovel-ready projects, because there's a lot of federal money coming our way. And there's actually a lot of state money that was the result of some of the stimulus induced surplus at the state of Minnesota. So there's state money coming our way too. So I look forward to working with you all, and happy holidays.
Thanks, Dorian. And thanks to the speakers today, Barbara Beck and Marty Cormack, and to all of you who are joining live on this webinar today in December, the closing webinar for 2021. And also we are grateful for everyone who is joining by listening in on the replay. So people are engaging in different ways in the content and participation in this webinar, and we're really glad you're here. So have a great rest of the day and join us again in January. Thank you.